3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. Last time, we walked through the other properties and tested what the records could actually prove without speculation. Today, we're examining the network inner circle and mapping what the documents show about actors, timeline decisions, and institutional response. As always, every document and source we reference is available at epsteinfiles.fm. So the first record is Ghislaine Maxwell's 2016 deposition in the G4 v. Maxwell case, where she was asked directly about her role in recruiting girls.
And we have to start there. That 2016 deposition, it's the baseline for any analysis of the network.
Why that document specifically?
Because it's the first time the narrative they built for decades that she was just a socialite, a girlfriend, it's the first time that narrative is tested under oath.
Right. It collides with the legal requirement to be truthful.
Exactly. And from a forensic perspective, what's striking is the absolute rigidity of her denial.
I want to read the exact exchange because the phrasing is so precise. The attorney asks, "Did you procure females for Jeffrey Epstein?"
And her answer,
"No." Then the attorney asks, "Do you ever participate in the recruitment of young women for massage purposes?" Her answer, "I have never recruited anyone for Jeffrey for any purpose."
For any purpose. That's the key phrase. It's a categorical absolute. In an audit, absolutes are an immediate signal.
A red flag.
A major red flag. When a CFO says, "I never approve payments without a PO," you immediately go looking for the payments made without one. Maxwell's entire defense hinges on this idea that she was a separate entity.
Living a parallel life.
Yes, a life of high society, totally unconnected to the operational details of Epstein's activities. She frames herself as the lady of the house in a social capacity, but not an operational one.
But then you open the DOJ Epstein files.
Right.
Specifically the data from the seized servers, and you find the alias, GMAX.
Yeah, it's not just there once or twice. It appears thousands of times in the email metadata.
So if you just listened to her deposition, you'd think her role was planning dinner parties.
Or decorating the properties. But the GMAX correspondence shows something entirely different. This was not a social email account.
Where was it?
It was an operational hub. It functioned like an enterprise resource planning system, but run by a single person.
Let's drill down on that. When we look at the content of these emails, we're not seeing guest lists for parties.
No, you're seeing the granular day-to-day management of a multinational operation.
For instance,
there are emails about hiring and firing the cleaning staff in Palm Beach. There are specific directives on the water temperature for the swimming pool.
That's specific.
Down to the brand of organic cereal that needed to be stocked. But the most critical cluster of emails, the ones that really matter, relate to the movement of assets.
The planes.
The planes.
Yeah.
The cars, the logistics. You see emails from GMAX directly to the pilots, David Rogers and Larry Visosky, giving them instructions.
Like what?
Prepare for Teterboro departure at 1400. Or car needed at Santa Fe FBO. This is not the behavior of a guest or a girlfriend.
No, this is a dispatcher, a COO.
It is the language of a chief operating officer. She is managing the logistics of the entire transport network.
And this creates a direct contradiction with her 2016 deposition.
A complete one.
If you're scheduling the plane, and that plane is documented as transporting victims, which the flight logs show, you cannot claim ignorance.
You are, in effect, moving the vehicle used in the commission of the crime. The GMAX data completely dismantles the wall of separation she tried to construct in that deposition.
And it goes beyond logistics. You mentioned the staff hierarchy documents.
Yes, these were internal manuals recovered from inside the residences. They lay out the chain of command in black and white.
And where is she in that chain?
She's at the top. The manuals state that when Mr. Epstein is absent, all instructions come from Mrs. Maxwell.
So she's not a partner. She's the primary authority.
For the household staff, yes. She is sometimes called the lady of the house, but the duties listed are purely managerial. Hiring, firing. She controlled the staff.
And in that kind of coercive environment, controlling the staff means controlling privacy.
It means controlling everything. She decided who could enter a room, when they could clean, and who had to leave. That is absolute operational control.
Let's follow the money. A COO-level role isn't usually a volunteer position. The media often presented her as an heiress, but the documents show a different financial picture.
The financial tracking is critical here. The pinpoint database and the documents released under the Transparency Act show a consistent flow of funds from Epstein to Maxwell. But one transaction stands out.
The $18.3 million.
$18.3 million.
That's not a stipend for expenses.
No, that is a capital injection. It's a settlement. The database records the transfer. And later we can see that money being used to fund her own projects, like Terramar.
Or to buy real estate.
Correct. But the size and timing suggest this was a distribution of profit from the enterprise. It solidifies her role as a partner, not an employee.
A financial node.
Precisely. She wasn't just receiving funds, she was holding and managing millions. This becomes crucial later in the Ghislaine Maxwell detention memo.
Where the prosecutors argued she was a flight risk.
Yes. They cited her access to these massive funds, combined with her multiple citizenships, as the reason to deny bail. The very money that proved her deep involvement was the thing that kept her in custody.
I want to overlay this financial data with the flight logs. We talk about the logs, but there's a specific pattern here. Her presence on flights versus the presence of victims.
We analyzed the logs from the early 90s through the mid-2000s. Maxwell is the single most frequent passenger listed.
More than Epstein himself?
More than anyone. But if you cross-reference the dates cited in the Giuffre v. Maxwell legal proceedings, the specific dates of alleged trafficking Maxwell is almost always on the plane.
So she's not just in the house when it happened, she's in the tube.
She's in the aluminum tube at 40,000 feet. The flight logs are unambiguous. They list Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Virginia Roberts. There's no physical way to be separate.
On a Gulfstream G2, there's no other room to go to.
You are sitting feet away. Her documented presence on those specific flights corroborates the victim testimony that she was the chaperone, that she was the one facilitating the travel.
So to summarize this first block, we have her deposition, which is a total denial.
We have the GMAX emails, which show total operational control.
We have the $18.3 million showing financial integration.
And the flight logs, which show physical proximity during the alleged crimes.
It's a complete picture.
It forms a triangle of evidence, capability, opportunity, and a financial motive.
So if Maxwell was the COO managing the internal network, the operations still needed an external supply.
It needed a recruitment pipeline.
Which brings us to Jean-Luc Brunel and his connection to MC2 modeling.
Jean-Luc Brunel. He was a major figure in the French modeling world, and the DOJ datasets show a clear corporate link between Epstein and Brunel's agency, MC2.
How is that structured? Was Epstein just an investor?
He provided capital, yes, but the records suggest it was more than a simple investment. MC2 seems to have functioned as a dual-use infrastructure.
Explain what dual use means in this context.
A legitimate modeling agency has to scout for young talent. It's part of the business model. They send scouts to find the next big thing in places like Eastern Europe or South America.
Right. That's standard practice.
But here, that legitimate mechanism was weaponized. The Giuffre deposition is very clear on this point. She testifies that Brunel used his professional status to promise modeling careers to young women.
Securing their visas, their travel documents.
All under the guise of a legitimate job. But the final destination wasn't a photo shoot in Paris.
It was one of Epstein's properties.
Brunel was the filter. He identified vulnerable individuals and used the bureaucratic cover of the modeling agency to move them across international borders without raising suspicion.
It solves a key logistical problem for a trafficking network.
It does. A model is a visa category. It explains the international travel. It explains why a young woman might not have much money. It explains the presence of an older male agent. MC2 provided the perfect cover.
Now, to be forensically precise here, do the DOJ files contain an actual contract? Something that says sourcing agreement for sexual services?
No, we do not have a document that says that. And that's the record gap. What we have is the financial adjacency Epstein's money in MC2.
We have the travel logs with Brunel on the plane.
And we have the victim testimony. But we do not have a signed trafficking contract. That's not how these operations work.
But the flight logs provide strong circumstantial evidence.
Very strong. Brunel appears frequently. But what's more telling are the passengers listed alongside him.
How so?
Often, when Brunel is on the manifest, other passengers are listed with just a first name, or simply as female or females. Many of the names appear to be Eastern European or South American.
And there are notations in some logs.
Yes, some versions of the logs have notes indicating these passengers are for a specific location or even a specific person. The statistical correlation is significant. Brunel arrives, and new young women enter the ecosystem.
The Giuffre v. Maxwell documents also mention him holding their passports.
Which is a classic control tactic in human trafficking. If you're a teenager in a foreign country and someone holds your passport for safekeeping, you're a prisoner.
You're completely dependent on the network.
For everything. Food, housing, your legal status. You have no way out.
Which raises the question of the institutional response. Brunel was not hiding. His agency had offices in New York and Miami. Why is there no record of a major federal investigation into him in the early 2000s?
That is the core of the institutional failure. The initial Palm Beach police investigation in 2005 focused almost exclusively on the local solicitation charges against Epstein.
They missed the bigger picture.
They completely missed the international trafficking component. The Brunel supply chain was left untouched. The DOJ records regarding the non-prosecution agreement show a clear lack of interest in pursuing the international actors.
So they treated it like a local problem.
A local prostitution case, not a global trafficking enterprise. And by failing to pull on the MC2 thread, they allowed the supply chain to continue operating for another decade.
Which brings us down the hierarchy to the domestic lieutenants. If Maxwell was the COO and Brunel was procurement, the day-to-day scheduling of the abuse fell to others.
It fell to people like Sarah Kellen.
Her name is all over the records.
In the flight logs and especially in the message books, she is everywhere. The legal summaries identify her as a key enabler, but the DOJ files show us how she enabled it. She was the scheduler.
Describe these message books. These aren't digital files.
No, they are physical, spiral-bound notepads. The kind with carbon copy pages you'd find in a small office in the 1990s. They're archaic, but forensically they're a goldmine.
And what do they show?
They have columns. To, from, message, and action. Kellen's name or initials appear constantly, either taking the message or in the action column.
And the content of the messages?
Hundreds and hundreds of entries from young women calling to confirm appointments. And they all use the same code word.
Massage.
Massage. Available for massage at 3 p.m., confirming massage for tomorrow. Kellen controlled this entire schedule.
She was the gatekeeper.
She was the firewall. By having Kellen handle the direct day-to-day communication with the victims, the booking, the payments, Epstein and Maxwell created a layer of insulation.
So if there was a problem, it stopped with her.
Exactly. If a victim complained, they complained to Sarah. If they needed money, they asked Sarah. It kept the principals clean, at least on paper.
And then there's Nadia Marcinkova.
Her role is different. The records refer to her as the global girl.
What does that mean?
She appears to start as a victim, sourced from Eastern Europe, but she transitions. The flight logs show her traveling constantly with Epstein, often as the only other passenger.
Moving between all the properties.
Palm Beach, New York, Paris, the island. The DOJ datasets show she was a constant presence for years, and the financial records show she was completely subsidized by the network.
Tuition, rent, stipends.
She was a full-time salaried member of the operation, and her role evolved into recruitment.
This transition from victim to perpetrator, it's a known strategy.
It's a powerful coercion mechanism. By making a victim complicit in the crime, you compromise them. You ensure their silence.
Because now they fear prosecution themselves.
Precisely. The documents suggest that both Kellen and Marcinkova were put in this position. It makes them far less likely to cooperate with law enforcement.
And that fear was justified, which brings us to the non-prosecution agreement, the 2008 NPA.
This is probably the single most controversial document in the entire public file. It's legally unusual.
How so?
Normally, an NPA is for a specific cooperating witness or a corporation admitting fault. But in this case, the immunity wasn't just for Epstein.
It was for his potential co-conspirators.
A vaguely defined group that included his employees. The agreement effectively granted blanket immunity to his entire inner circle before they were even formally investigated, let alone charged.
Kellen, Marcinkova, even Maxwell were covered.
Yes, they were protected by this federal agreement, is why the case went cold for a decade. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami essentially signed away its right to prosecute the network.
The fact that Epstein's lawyers fought for that clause is telling.
It's a form of documentation in itself. It tells you who they were trying to protect. They knew Kellen and Marcinkova were essential to the operation and had to be silenced.
This level of organization extends to the general staff and operational security. This wasn't a chaotic environment.
No, it was run like a compartmented intelligence operation. Everything was siloed.
The staff manuals we discussed earlier.
They didn't just define the hierarchy, they enforced silence. There were strict rules. Do not enter a room when the door is closed.
Do not interact with guests unless spoken to.
And everyone signed an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement.
And these weren't standard agreements.
They were extremely aggressive, with huge financial penalties for revealing anything about Epstein's life or his guests.
Let's go back to the pilots. David Rogers' logs are a key source.
The pilot logs are the closest thing we have to an objective, contemporaneous timeline of events.
Why are they so reliable?
Because pilots are legally required by the FAA to maintain them. They log flight times, engine cycles, everything. And we see a consistent discrepancy between the pilot's personal logs and the official manifests.
The official manifest being the ones submitted to customs?
Correct. The official manifest might say Jeffrey Epstein +1, but Rogers' personal log for that same flight will name the passenger, Jeffrey Epstein plus Virginia Roberts.
So he was recording the names the official record was trying to erase.
He had to. His pilot's license depended on the accuracy of his logbook. In a way, the pilots became the unintentional archivists of the entire conspiracy.
There's also the financial intelligence piece, the idea of a big Epstein file at the Treasury Department.
This comes from the Carl Corey Stofflet source, and it revolves around SARS, Suspicious Activity Reports.
Explain what those are.
Post 9/11 banking regulations require banks to report any transaction that seems unusual. Large cash withdrawals, transactions with no clear business purpose, anything that might signal money laundering or other crimes.
And Epstein's accounts were generating these reports.
Constantly. J.P. Morgan and other banks filed numerous SARs on him. We're talking about repeated cash withdrawals just under the $10,000 reporting threshold.
Structuring.
A classic sign of it. Plus, wires to young women, payments to offshore shell companies. The financial system's warning lights were flashing.
So the data was being reported, the system worked up to a point.
The reporting mechanism worked. The banks fulfilled their legal obligation. They flagged the activity. These reports accumulated at FinC, the Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit.
And nothing happened.
That's the enforcement failure. We have documentation of the reporting, but a complete lack of documented enforcement action based on that intelligence. That file should have triggered an immediate, full-scale IRS criminal investigation.
And it didn't.
It did not.
This leads us to the most complex part of the record, the Book of Black and the allegations of intelligence connections.
Record Cluster 5, the little black book.
Yeah.
You have to be extremely careful with this document.
Why?
Because forensically, it is a directory. It is not a client list. That's a critical distinction.
So being in the book doesn't prove complicity.
It proves you were in Epstein's orbit. It could mean anything. It includes contact information for his pilots, his chefs, his lawyers, politicians, scientists, royalty.
But the analysis of the book shows it was structured. It wasn't just an A to Z list.
No, it was segmented into circles. A social circle, a financial circle, a royal circle, and a scientific circle.
The scientific circle seems out of place.
It was a key part of his cover. By funding labs and hosting conferences with Nobel laureates, he projected an image of a serious philanthropist, a patron of science. It sanitized his reputation.
And the royal circle.
That provided a different kind of cover, an aura of untouchability. Traveling with a royal means fewer questions at borders, instant credibility. The book is a map of his influence peddling network.
The book also details his corporate structures, the shell companies.
Plan D, LLC, JGE. This is a common tactic for high net worth individuals, but taken to an extreme. The plane wasn't owned by him personally. It was owned by a shell company. The real estate was held in LLCs.
For liability protection.
And for obfuscation. It makes it much harder to track his assets and his movements. It's a deliberate strategy to create confusion and legal hurdles for any investigation.
Okay. Let's address the intelligence angle directly. Record Cluster 6. This is where we have to apply the strictest forensic discipline.
We have to. The sources here, like the Epstein 7 pages test, make very specific claims about state-level involvement.
The core claim is a parallel operation. Epstein and Maxwell running a sexual compromise operation.
In a tech-based network capture operation run by entities like Unit 8200 and the company Exonius.
Let's test that second claim first. The source alleges that these entities have access to U.S. federal networks. What do the documents show?
First, Unit 8200 is Israel's signals intelligence agency, similar to the NSA. It's a documented fact that many Israeli tech founders are veterans of that unit.
Right.
But the critical question is, do we have a DOJ contract, a bank transfer, an internal memo in the Epstein files that links Epstein's enterprise to Exonius or shows data flowing from them?
And the answer?
We do not have documentation for that in this release. The link is not in this specific set of files. It remains an allegation based on association, not a documented operational connection.
So there's a record gap.
A significant one.
The company Carbine is slightly different, though?
It is. With Carbine, we have public business records. They show a direct financial link between Jeffrey Epstein and Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, as co-investors. That is a documented fact.
And Carbine's business is 911 emergency response systems.
Correct. They develop platforms that handle sensitive data from 911 calls, location, video, audio. The concern raised in the source material is about the counterintelligence risk.
But again, let's be precise. We have the investment link. Do we have any document in this file showing data was actually transferred from those systems for illicit purposes?
No. The
Okay.
financial link is proven. The espionage activity is unproven in these specific files.
Let's turn to the blackmail tapes. This is the heart of the honey trap theory. The Stofflet source says the FBI seized hard drives and other media.
The FBI's own evidence logs confirm that. They seized multiple hard drives, CDs, thumb drives, and we have testimony from victims and staff that the residences were wired with cameras.
So the infrastructure for blackmail existed, and the storage media was seized?
Correct.
But the official conclusion from the Department of Justice is completely different.
It is. A DOJ memo, which is cited in the Stofflet source, states that after an exhaustive review of the seized evidence, they found no client list and no evidence of an elite blackmail operation.
That's a direct contradiction. The hardware is there, the witnesses say it happened, but the DOJ says the files don't exist.
It is the central conflict in the entire case. Either the most damning evidence was destroyed before the raid, which is plausible, or it was found and is being withheld from the public.
The source material refers to this as raw evidence.
And that's exactly what's missing from the public document releases. We have the logs, the bank statements, the testimony. We do not have the actual video files.
What about the broader honey trap narrative? The source is referencing Ari Ben-Menashe or Whitney Webb's research.
Ari Ben-Menashe, a former Israeli intelligence officer, has claimed on the record that Epstein and Maxwell were intelligence assets for Israel. Whitney Webb's work documents the deep intelligence connections of Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell.
So the historical context for that theory exists?
The lineage is there.
Yeah.
Robert Maxwell was a known Mossad asset. That is historical fact. But the key question for our purposes is, does the DOJ Epstein file contain a document proving it?
A contract, an operational order, a payment from an intelligence agency to Epstein.
And it does not. Therefore, we have to classify these claims as testimony or allegation, not as documented fact based on this specific body of evidence.
So if we synthesize all of this, the operational reality the documents map out is a network with 3 distinct layers.
Yes. Layer 1 is the face, Jeffrey Epstein. He provided the money and the social access. He used his philanthropic and scientific connections as cover.
Layer 2, the managers.
Ghislaine Maxwell as the COO, Sarah Kellen and Nadia Marcinkova as the lieutenants running the day-to-day scheduling and enforcement.
And layer 3, the supply chain.
Jean-Luc Brunel and MC2, providing a steady stream of victims under the legitimate cover of a modeling agency.
And surrounding all of it is a pattern of institutional failure.
It's the only way a network like this survives for so long. The SARs were filed at Treasury, but not acted upon. The pilot logs contained the truth, but the passengers were protected by the MPA.
The data points were all there in different government agencies.
They just weren't connected.
Yeah.
Or someone made a decision not to connect them.
And the intelligence connections remain the dark matter of the case.
That's a good way to put it. We can see the effects, the unusual protection, the legal anomalies, but we cannot see the object itself in the documents released so far.
So we have mapped the verified inner circle, Maxwell, Brunel, Kellen using depositions and logs. We have identified the clear gap between the evidence seized and the DOJ's official conclusion on blackmail. And we have audited the intelligence claims and found them lacking corroboration within this specific set of documents.
The record describes a sophisticated, protected, multi-layered criminal enterprise.
Next time, Les Wexner.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name, and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.